Welcome back. So I'm going to return to Projects Controller, and you'll see here in the index action, currently we are fetching all projects in the system created by anyone. In real life, of course, you don't want that. We want to fetch only the projects created by the current user. Now, you remember, we already have a relationship here between a user and their projects, which means if I want to grab all projects, I could say auth user projects. Next, though, if I scroll down, here's where we show a project. So consider this. I'm going to boot up PHP Artisan Tinker, and let's set up a factory for a project. I just want to quickly scaffold some random project created by somebody who is not me. So actually, let's bring this back. So before, when we were fetching all projects, if I switch back, we would see that. Even though we didn't create this project, we can still see it. But if we now scope it to only our own projects, we won't see that. But if I switch back, we're going to trying to get property of a non-object. And that's because, now this action assumes that you're signed in, but we didn't enforce that on the routing level. We already called it here. So I'll do it one more time, but pretty soon we're going to migrate over to a group middleware. Anyways, if I now switch back and give this a refresh, there we go. If you want to look at your projects, you have to sign in. So let's do that. I have an account here. And now if I visit the projects dashboard, we get only our own projects. And at the moment, we don't have any. Now, we haven't yet set up a view or a page to create a new project. So we'll do it behind the scenes real quick. App project force create. And we'll set the title to my project and the description to Lorem Ipsum. And field owner, we forgot to set the owner ID because we're doing it manually. My owner ID is 6. Okay, so that means if I were to switch back to Safari and give this a refresh, we now have our project. But let's ensure that we don't have permission to view projects that we didn't create. So again, let's go to projects and we can see this project was created by somebody else, which means I shouldn't be able to view it, but currently I can. Now let me show you a couple steps we can handle this before writing a test. We know that every project has an owner ID, right? So what you could say is, if the authenticated user's ID is not the owner ID of the project, then we're going to say you don't have permission. So you can redirect, you can abort, whatever you want here. So now, if you were to try to view that project, sorry, forbidden, but you can view your own projects. Now, you can store this here. You can store it as a middleware. You could store it as a policy. You could do a number of things. So what I'm going to do is comment this out, and I do want to approach this as a test. So I'm going to go into our tests feature section. Here's our projects test. And here's all the examples I have so far. So we do have one to assert that you must be authenticated to create a project. But why don't we duplicate this? Or we could even merge them into one method, but let's do it separately for now. Only authenticated users can view projects. So if we were to make a GET request to /projects, you're not signed in, so I do assert that you are redirected to the login page. So if I give that a run, we do get green. And that's because, once again, in our routes file, we added the middleware. So if I did not have that, it would fail, and that's what we want. Now, only authenticated users, why don't we rename this though? Why don't we say guests may not view projects? And I'll do another one here because we're not checking authenticated users. All we're doing in these tests is asserting that a guest cannot do the given thing. So we'll say guests cannot create projects. Next, we'll do another one, and then I think I'm going to merge these. Guests cannot view a single project. Okay, so now I have to say, given I have some kind of project, and we'll go ahead and persist that. If I try to access that project, and I'll use project path for that, then once again, I assert that I'm redirected to the login page. So let's give that one a run. And that's failing. We must not have added the middleware. So yeah, check this out. Notice I keep adding it over and over. This is a good use case for using a group middleware. But nonetheless, let's get it to pass. And there we get green. Okay, and in fact, let's just run all of the tests. Oh, we do have one new issue. A user can view a project. Let's scroll down. Here it is. So we have an issue with this test. And yes, this one's now failing as we would expect. So we'll say their project, and then we will sign in a user. This, B, and then let's create a user. Okay, so if I sign in a user I just created, and now when I create the project, we'll be explicit that the owner of the project will be the person that I currently have signed in for our test. Okay, so now if I give it a run, we should be back to green. So let's run all tests again, and everything is passing. Okay, so that means if we want, we can do a little refactoring of our routes file. Let's switch over to a route group. The middleware for this group will be auth. And then, well, first, before I do that, let's disable all of the middleware here. And now if I run our tests, a bunch should fail, and they do. Okay, we're now going to move them to the middleware group. And if I run our tests again, they should be back to green. So that's a safe refactor. Now, the home controller, I don't know if we're using that yet, but if we do, that will be bound to the same middleware. And in fact, if we open that up, home controller, yeah, here's another way that you can apply middleware. So some people prefer this, others think it's weird to hit a controller before you go to the middleware. It's almost like going or digging through the onion and then coming back out of the onion for something. It's a little awkward. Nonetheless, I've done it sometimes myself, so make up your own mind. But anyways, because we now have that within the route group middleware, I can safely remove that. And this is what we get. Anyways, if I now switch back, I want to focus on this. So I kind of want to say only the owner of a project can view the project. So let's go back to projects test. And we had one that we were working on. A user can view their project. But what about other people's projects? So we do have one already that ensures that you're signed in, but once you are, we still need protection there. So we can say an authenticated user cannot view the projects of others. Okay, so let's grab some of this, sign in a user, and disable exception handling. We will create a project that was not created by who we currently have signed in. And then if we try to visit that page, it shouldn't work. So I can assert status 403. Let's try that. Let's give this a run, and it fails. So I expected a 403, but we received a 200. Okay, how come? Well, we tried to load this page, and we still have this commented out. So let's give that another run. And if I rerun the test, we got an HTTP exception. And that's because we did disable exception handling here. In our case, we do want to catch it, so I can convert it into a response. So yeah, now if I comment that out, we do in fact get green. Now, because this test is passing, and in fact, let's just run all of them. Oh, whoops. A user can view their project. Oh, you know what I bet it is? Let's come back. If the authenticated user, I bet this is failing. Probably because owner ID isn't being fetched and interpreted as a number. Yeah, so you could do that, or you could do a less strict check. Or you could cast it from your model. Lots of options there. But anyways, let's keep pushing forward. Because all of these are returning green, I can now once again refactor this if I want. One option is, well, if a project belongs to an owner, yes, I can fetch the project or projects from the user, but I can't do the inverse. So if I have an existing project, I want to fetch the user associated with it, or the owner of the project. Okay, let's make that work real quick, and then we'll call it a lesson. In my model test here, we'll say a project belongs to an owner. So let's create a project here, and then I want to fetch the owner of that project, and that should be an instance of user. So we could do instance of user, or if you want to be very specific that it has to be this exact user, you could do that as well. Let's just do this one. like so. So I'm going to give this test a run. It will fail, and now I will make a pass. Uncomment it, run it again. It still fails, but now we're calling the method. And the relationship is a belongs to. A project is owned by an owner. Okay, let's give it another run, and we now get green. Okay, so if I switch back up to our previous test, we could now say, well, if the authenticated user, and Eloquent provides a method called is. This checks to see if two models are the same by looking at the ID. So I could say, well, if it is the project owner, or is not, rather, if the authenticated user is not the owner of the project, then abort. That reads pretty well. So if I give that a run, we now get green still. So that's a decent refactor, and I always like it when the conditional reads as humanly as possible. If the authenticated user is not the owner of the project, then abort. Pretty nice. But yeah, if you wanted to, we could also migrate this over to a policy. Or we could stick with this for now, and then if we feel any issues where we have repetition or anything like that, then we could move over to a policy. No problem there whatsoever. So now, if we switch back to Safari, when we view our projects, we see our own, but no one else's. And we can look at our own single projects, but again, no one else's. So let's keep chipping away in the next episode.